Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a world where silence wasn't golden, it was strictly enforced. Imagine walking through a sprawling palace, sunlight glinting off white jade tiles, imperial banners fluttering in the breeze, and guards stationed every 10 paces. But there's something off. A strange invisible pressure sits on your chest. You realize no one is smiling. Not a single giggle, not even a poorly stifled snort. And should you dare crack a grin, well, you'd better enjoy exile, or worse, eternal bureaucratic reassignment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from a cozy nook somewhere in the world, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where this sleepy little time machine ends up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've arrived in ancient China sometime around the 2nd century BCE. The scent of sandalwood mingles with the aroma of steamed dumplings. Someone is always eating dumplings in this world, especially bureaucrat sand. The rhythms of the court echo down long corridors tiled in polished black stone. This is the Han Dynasty, and the man in charge is Emperor Wen. Well, almost in charge. He's still consolidating power, and he's not amused by anything. You walk into the imperial court just in time to catch a minor official drop a bamboo scroll and mutter something that sounds suspiciously like a joke, a sharp intake of breath from those nearby. You brace for what comes next. A clack of sandals. A scribe clears his throat. That will be noted, he says blandly, in the registry of emotional indiscretions. You blink. Emotional what? Welcome to the world of the silent court, a nickname historians still use to describe the early reign of Emperor Wen, a ruler known for his distaste for excessive joy, or at least public displays of it. He believed in order, restraint, and the kind of etiquette where even clapping too enthusiastically could draw side-eye. Historians still argue whether this cultural suppression was driven by Confucian ideals about solemnity and hierarchy, or whether it was Wen's personal reaction to the chaotic years before he rose to power, a time when warlords laughed far too freely before beheading rivals. Either way, you can feel it in the air. Mirth is dangerous. A scroll posted at the palace entrance outlines acceptable facial expressions. Serene contentment is approved. Mild curiosity is fine. But open laughter, forbidden unless granted by imperial decree, which, to date, has never happened. As you explore the palace, you notice that even the fountains babble in strangely muted tones, as though the architects designed them not to encourage merriment. Courtiers glide rather than walk, their sleeves like heavy wings of obedience. You try to imagine someone telling a joke in this space and fail. But perhaps the oddest part? The imperial dogs have been trained not to bark. Yes, even the dogs. And not just silenced. These dogs look ashamed of joy, their tails tucked, their eyes wary. One seems to be smirking, just a little, until a guard clears his throat and the pup flattens to the ground. Now, you may be wondering, why all this? Why ban laughter? Well, Emperor Wen had what modern folks might call trauma. His youth was shaped by assassinations, betrayals, and a father who occasionally chuckled after signing off on mass executions. Laughter, to Wen, was the soundtrack of instability. In his mind, to control the empire, he had to control tone. And laughter, that tone was unpredictable, too close to mockery, too close to freedom. You pass a chamber with stone benches arranged in tidy rosettes, a hall for musical performances. Now, it's a meditation chamber. The zither strings have been removed. The dancers reassigned to tea service. The last performance here ended abruptly when someone laughed too hard at a comedic shadow play. The puppeteer vanished. So did the puppets. Now the only shadows allowed are the ones cast by incense smoke Still, not everyone buys into the ban. You overhear whispers as you walk the colonnades. Maids practice smiling only with their eyes. Eunuchs trade riddles in coded language. There's talk of a poet who hides puns in his verse dangerous stuff. But more on him later. Tonight, you pass the Hall of the Five Virtues, where a giant placard reads, "Harmony is not noise, joy is not jest." Even Confucius, had he been asked, might have raised an eyebrow. Because here's the thing, laughter, scholars argue, is hard to kill. It leaks through the cracks. It giggles in private gardens and bursts out at funerals when someone stumbles on their own sandal. One historian wrote that despite the emperor's decrees, the imperial kitchen was the loudest place in the entire palace, mostly because cooks have no time for metaphysics when a duck is burning. But you wouldn't know that walking these hushed halls. Here, even the wind seems to tiptoe. And you visitor, dreamer, time traveler, you hold your breath as a child runs by, her tiny feet pattering against stone. She pauses, looks at you, and just for a moment, grins. It's contagious. But before you can return the smile, a steward steps between you. "Eyes forward," he says softly. "We do not grin in the presence of order." You follow the steward's footsteps down a lantern-lit corridor, the silence folding over you like silk. The scent of oiled paper and perfumed ink floats on the air. This is the heart of the palace now, closer to the imperial study and closer still to the man himself, Emperor Wen. You don't meet him right away. Not exactly. Instead, you arrive at a wide chamber with polished stone floors and calligraphy scrolls that seem to hum with restraint. Here, you wait. Everyone waits. The guards, the scribes, the ministers, clutching their endless records and reports, all with brows slightly furrowed, lips compressed in what might have once been human emotion. They all wait in silence. And then he appears. Emperor Wen is not what you expect. He's not draped in gold or towering over his officials. He's short, slight, almost forgettable except for the intensity in his eyes. Those eyes sweep the room like a blade. They miss nothing. And you realize instantly, this is not a man who fears war. He fears disorder. And laughter? That's a rebellion of the lungs. Wen speaks with precision. Each syllable lands like a decree. He doesn't raise his voice, but when he says, "There is a time for joy, but not while the realm is fragile," you can practically hear the empire nodding in unison. The historical records describe Wen as a reformer, a man of great restraint. He cut taxes, simplified the law codes, and demilitarized many internal borders. Under him, the Han Dynasty experienced rare stability, but there's always a trade-off, isn't there? He also discouraged festivals that got too exuberant, replaced musical court performances with lectures on ethics, and once had a grand banquet canceled because someone laughed too loudly during the rehearsal. Historians still argue whether these changes were grounded in Confucian ideals or merely the emperor's own paranoia. Confucius himself did stress dignity and harmony, but he never said no comedy shows, ever. Some scholars claim Wen's father, Emperor Gaozu, was known for wild, bawdy celebrations. Others whisper that Wen's mother once laughed at a court poet and was later found poisoned, though no record officially confirms this. In any case, the young Wen seemed to decide emotions were volatile, laughter most of all. He had been groomed to rule in a time of chaos, and chaos often wore a smile. As you linger at the edge of the court chamber, you notice a strange architectural detail. The ceiling tiles above the emperor's seat are arranged in such a way that they dampen sound, one of the earliest known examples of acoustical engineering in imperial China. A whisper can be heard clearly. A chuckle absorbed into the rafters. The emperor demanded clarity, but not volume. A low-ranking scribe drops a brush. It rolls. No one breathes. The emperor doesn't look up, but he lifts a finger. That's all it takes. Two guards gently escort the scribe out. Not punished, just gone. Reassigned, maybe. You never see him again. Wen rises and walks the length of the chamber. His footsteps echo like punctuation marks. You follow at a distance, through another hallway, this one lined with statues of ancient sages. You recognize Laozi, with his long beard and sly half-smile. A risk, that statue. Someone might think the old sage is smirking, but you keep moving. Eventually, you reach his private garden, and there, away from the eyes of the ministers, Emperor Wen stops. A single plum blossom falls. He watches it, and then he exhales. Not quite a sigh, but something close to relief. And you wonder, does he ever laugh, even alone? There's a rumor, of course there is, whispered by gardeners and dismissed by officials, that once, during the chrysanthemum bloom, Wen stumbled on a sleeping cat tangled in embroidery thread. The cat rolled, squeaked, and startled itself into a backflip. They say the emperor chuckled, just once, then ordered all embroidery work to be moved indoors. But who knows? Maybe it's a fable. A lonely emperor battling inner joy like is a dragon behind his ribs. Because here's the truth. History doesn't always tell in footnotes. Power makes you afraid of anything you can't control. And laughter, it's unpredictable. It spreads without permission. It levels the field between emperor and servant, scholar and street vendor. It cannot be unlaughed. So Emperor Wen didn't just ban laughter. He banned surprise. He banned spontaneity. He banned the moment where your shoulders shake and your eyes squint and your breath hitches into something primal and uncontainable. And in doing so, he built a world of restraint so tight it hummed like a taut string. A world where even happiness wore slippers. You return to the main palace hall as the emperor disappears into his quarters. The guards resume their vigil. The wind resumes its polite hush. And you realize you haven't smiled in over an hour. The next morning begins, as it always does in this kingdom of quiet control, with the sound of nothing. You wake to a sun already high, filtered through screens of thin rice paper. A bird chirps just once, and you swear it looks around guiltily afterward. Even nature here seems to have gotten the memo. Today's court assembly is not about taxes or border disputes. Number today, the emperor is unveiling something newest, most carefully written proclamation yet. You take your place along the side of the grand hall, next to a woman holding a brush but no ink. She's a reaction scribe, trained to record not what is said, but how it is received. Even emotions, here, are archived. A herald steps forward with a scroll wrapped in gold-threaded silk. He reads slowly, deliberately, and you hear it. Let it be known henceforth that mirthful eruptions of the mouth and throat, known as laughter, are to be regarded as signals of social disruption, disrespectful to the harmony of the state, and thereby forbidden in all official precincts of the empire. That's right. You just witnessed the official criminalization of giggling. the Great Silence Edict of 179 BCE. The proclamation includes a list of expressions to be discouraged, including hooting, guffawing, snorting, and anything resembling a donkey's hee-haw. You wonder what meeting led to that last one. Historians still argue whether this edict was widely enforced outside the palace. Records in the provinces are vague. Some suggest rural communities ignored it entirely, while others adopted the tone in their own governance, forbidding laughter during market negotiations or ancestral rites. One town even built a stillness pavilion in its central square, where people could sit quietly and reflect on the emperor's virtues in complete, uninterrupted silence. Back at court, however, things get serious. Literally. You watch as the emperor's advisors replace their welcome speeches with bows of increasing complexity. Instead of applause at the end of a presentation, ministers now place both hands on their hearts and blink twice. That's the new sign of approval. One official tries a subtle smile, just a little curve. The emperor doesn't flinch, but later that evening, the official is reassigned to grain accounting, the administrative equivalent of being put in the dungeon with spreadsheets. But the ban is more than symbolic. Soon, entire professions must adapt. You pass a troupe of palace dancers in the corridor. They've begun training in neutral expression movement choreography without joy. Their new dance is titled Wind Through Bamboo. It's beautiful and deeply, profoundly unfun. The musicians suffer too. Drums are now considered too jubilant. Flutes are allowed, but only in the lower register. And cymbals, don't even ask. The strangest change of all? The palace dogs, once playful little creatures who chased tassels and nibbled on noble robes, are now walked twice a day in tight formation. No barking, no wagging. One particularly cheerful spaniel disappears after 3 enthusiastic tail thumps. Rumor has it he's been reassigned to guard duty at a northern granary. And then there's the jester. Ah, yes. Every palace has one. Or did. Yours, well, he hasn't been seen since the edict. His name was Gia, and his act involved balancing porcelain bowls on his head while reciting Confucian sayings backwards. The emperor once smirked, just once. But Gia, it seems, took that as permission to test a new routine, impersonating imperial advisors using boiled turnips as puppets. Bad move. He was last spotted riding away on a mule named Regulation. That's not a joke. That's historical rumor. But the name, suspiciously on brand. Still, a few people try to fight back, in quiet ways. You hear whispers of scholars inserting hidden puns into philosophical text. A recipe scroll circulates with instructions to beat the egg whites until they're as stiff as the minister of rites. Subtle satire, but dangerous nonetheless. One night, you stumble into the servants' quarters just as a group of them are passing around a scroll. It looks like an official document, but you soon realize it's a list of forbidden jokes. Preserved, copied, and memorized like scripture. Example: what do you call a Confucian with a crooked hat? A philosopher with questionable angles. It's not good. But in this world, that's revolutionary. Laughter becomes a kind of underground movement. Secret chuckle circles meet in bathhouses and storerooms, where jokes are whispered between gulps of tea and muffled behind towels. The punishment, if caught, isn't death, it's worse. You'll be forced to compose reflections on harmony for court officials in triplicate, with ink made from stale soy paste. And yet, people keep doing it because something strange happens when you ban laughter. It doesn't die. It evolves. It hides in poetry. It slips into metaphors. It lives in the exaggerated sighs of tired ministers, in the eyebrow twitches of overwhelmed stewards, and in the winks of kitchen boys who drop bowls on purpose just to watch the uptight nobles jump. You, dear listener, become part of it too. You find yourself stifling your own chuckles at the absurdity of it all, at the way a smile becomes contraband, at the way joy, when banned, becomes sharper, braver, almost sacred. You're starting to see it now. This isn't just a rule. It's an empire-wide experiment in suppressing the human spirit. And spoiler alert, it's not going to last. But we'll get to that. For now, take a slow breath. Exhale and listen to the quiet buzz of a palace that's forgotten how to laugh, but not how to want to. Night has fallen over the capital, and the lanterns flicker like shy fireflies against the palace eaves. You walk beneath carved wooden beams painted with dragons that no longer dance, they merely glide, elegant and emotionless. The stars above are the only witnesses to what's about to unfold, a crisis no emperor plans for. Because tonight, the court jester's absence has become a problem. You first notice it during an official banquet in the Hall of Ceremonies. The air smells of roast duck, five spice, and faint tension. The emperor presides over a long, silent table flanked by ministers with impeccable posture and absolutely no charisma. The dishes are elaborate. The conversation is not. Normally, the jester would appear now lighten the mood, maybe with a riddle about a clumsy monk or a parable involving a greedy goat. But he's gone. And in his absence, the room sags with awkward formality. Then it happens. A hiccup. Just one. A minor noble, no older than 20, hiccups during the toast. It's small, barely audible, but in a room this silent, it might as well be thunder. All heads turn. The noble turns scarlet. The emperor slowly lowers his chopsticks. "You find the soup amusing?" he asks, voice calm. The young man stammers something about indigestion. Someone else coughs an attempted cover-up, but the damage is done. What follows isn't punishment, it's worse. The noble is required to stand for the remainder of the banquet, holding a scroll on the virtue of emotional moderation. By the end of the night, he's memorized all 87 verses. But here's the thing, the tension doesn't leave, it grows. Without someone to release Ida Fool, a clown, a scapegoat, the pressure builds in the shadows of every hall. Historians often overlook this moment. It's small, a hiccup at dinner. But palace records note a sharp rise in disciplinary summons following that week. Coincidence? Maybe. But some scholars argue it marked the first visible crack in the silent court's emotional dam. You wander into the old jester's quarters the next day. They're small, cluttered, and eerily still. A pile of broken props sits in the corner. A false beard, a crooked flute, a sack of pickled radishes carved into caricatures. On the wall is a painted scroll with the phrase, "Laughter is a mirror. Break it and still you see yourself." That's bold, possibly treasonous, and definitely poetic. But G is not here. No one says where he went, just that he was no longer suited to the tone of the times, which in bureaucratic language could mean anything from banishment to bookkeeping. You leave the room with a strange ache in your chest. Later, You find yourself in one of the palace courtyards in an echo chamber of stone and trimmed trees. A servant walks past, balancing a tray of teacups stacked in an improbable pyramid. He stumbles. The top cup wobbles, and you catch a flicker of it. A stifled laugh. Someone tried to hold it in. Maybe you. Maybe the guard standing near the koi pond. But it slips. Just a note. A breath too sharp. A moment too human. The guard glances up. The servant straightens. Nothing is said. But everything is heard. That's how it goes now. Laughter isn't gone. It's just gone quiet. It survives in odd ways. In the kitchens, chefs begin naming dishes things like Harmony Duck and Steamed Justice. A subtle jab. In the royal bathhouse, one masseuse has developed a method of tickling pressure points, but only for those who dare ask. And in the stables, grooms whisper jokes into horse ears just to hear a snort. One groom swears a horse learned to laugh on command. He was reassigned. It's not just servants, either. Court ladies start sewing smile lines into their sleeves' delicate pleats that, when folded just right, resemble a closed-mouth grin. Their way of remembering what it felt like to share a joke without fear. Even the children of minor nobles begin inventing sad riddles that aren't really sad at all. Like, what weeps but isn't sad, spills but isn't wine? Answer. A soup pot overturned by a jester's ghost. It doesn't make much sense, but they whisper it like it's sacred. And perhaps it is. Because what you're witnessing isn't just rebellion, it's cultural adaptation. The palace is learning to laugh without laughing. Joy, once public, has become private, subversive, precious. Historians still debate whether Emperor Wen truly understood what was happening beneath his own nose. Some argue he was aware and chose to ignore the smaller leaks in favor of maintaining the larger illusion of control. Others believe he was so isolated by his ministers and rituals that he never noticed the underground joy blossoming like moss in the cracks of stone. But you're here. You see it. You feel it in every unspoken joke, every accidental pun, every knowing glance between servants. And you begin to realize a palace without laughter isn't peaceful. It's pressurized. And someday, something is going to pop. Night has fallen over the capital, and the lanterns flicker like shy fireflies against the palace eaves. You walk beneath carved wooden beams painted with dragons that no longer dance, they merely glide, elegant and emotionless. The stars above are the only witnesses to what's about to unfold, a crisis no emperor plans for. Because tonight, the court jester's absence has become a problem. You first notice it during an official banquet in the Hall of Ceremonies. The air smells of roast duck, five spice, and faint tension. The emperor presides over a long, silent table, flanked by ministers with impeccable posture and absolutely no charisma. The dishes are elaborate. The conversation is not. Normally, the jester would appear now lighten the mood, maybe with a riddle about a clumsy monk or a parable involving a greedy goat. But he's gone, and in his absence, the room sags with awkward formality. Then it happens. A hiccup. Just one. A minor noble, no older than 20, hiccups during the toast. It's small, barely audible, but in a room this silent, it might as well be thunder. All heads turn. The noble turns scarlet. The emperor slowly lowers his chopsticks. "You find the soup amusing?" he asks, voice calm. The young man stammers something about indigestion. Someone else coughs sand attempt to cover up, but the damage is done. What follows isn't punishment. It's worse. The noble is required to stand for the remainder of the banquet, holding a scroll on the virtue of emotional moderation. By the end of the night, he's memorized all 87 verses. But here's the thing. The tension doesn't leave. It grows. Without someone to release eat a fool, a clown, a scapegoat, the pressure builds in the shadows of every hall. Historians often overlook this moment. It's small, a hiccup at dinner. But Palace records note a sharp rise in disciplinary summons following that week. Coincidence? Maybe. But some scholars argue it marked the first visible crack in the silent court's emotional dam. You wander into the old jester's quarters the next day. They're small, cluttered, and eerily still. A pile of broken props sits in the corner. A false beard, a crooked flute, a sack of pickled radishes carved into caricatures. On the wall is a painted scroll with the phrase, "Laughter is a mirror. Break it and still you see yourself." That's bold, possibly treasonous, and definitely poetic. But G is not here. No one says where he went, just that he was no longer suited to the tone of the times, which in bureaucratic language could mean anything from banishment to bookkeeping. You leave the room with a strange ache in your chest. Later, you find yourself in one of the palace courtyards in echo chamber of stone and trimmed trees. A servant walks past, balancing a tray of teacups stacked in an improbable pyramid. He stumbles. The top cup wobbles, and you catch a flicker of it. A stifled laugh. Someone tried to hold it in. Maybe you, maybe the guard standing near the koi pond, but it slips. Just a note, a breath too sharp, a moment too human. The guard glances up. The servant straightens. Nothing is said, but everything is heard. That's how it goes now. Laughter isn't gone, it's just gone quiet. It survives in odd ways. In the kitchens, chefs begin naming dishes, things like Harmony Duck and Steamed Justice. A subtle jab. In the royal bathhouse, one masseuse has developed a method of tickling pressure points, but only for those who dare ask. And in the stables, grooms whisper jokes into horse ears just to hear a snort. One groom swears a horse learned to laugh on command. He was reassigned. It's not just servants either. Court ladies start sewing smile lines into their sleeves' delicate pleats that, when folded just right, resemble a closed mouth grin. Their way of remembering what it felt like to share a joke without fear. Even the children of minor nobles begin inventing sad riddles that aren't really sad at all. Like, what weeps but isn't sad, spills but isn't wine? Answer, a soup pot overturned by a jester's ghost. It doesn't make much sense, but they whisper it like it's sacred. And perhaps it is. Because what you're witnessing isn't just rebellion, it's cultural adaptation. The palace is learning to laugh without laughing. Joy, once public, has become private, subversive, precious. Historians still debate whether Emperor Wen truly understood what was happening beneath his own nose. Some argue he was aware and chose to ignore the smaller leaks in favor of maintaining the larger illusion of control. Others believe he was so isolated by his ministers and rituals that he never noticed the underground joy blossoming like moss in the cracks of stone. But you're here. You see it, you feel it in every unspoken joke, every accidental pun, every knowing glance between servants. And you begin to realize a palace without laughter isn't peaceful, it's pressurized. And someday, something is going to pop. Dawn breaks pale and uncertain across the roof tiles, painting the Forbidden City spires in sleepy gold. You walk slowly this morning, your sandals brushing the edge of dew-soaked moss in the courtyards, because today, the laughter war enters its most unexpected battlefield, philosophy. Yes, philosophy. Because even in the Emperor's carefully curated empire of calm, there remain old scholars too respected to silence and too sarcastic to ignore. You take a seat beside a lotus pond as three of them gather, masters Lu, Qian, and Bo. Collectively known as the three grumblers of the inner court, these men have spent the last 40 years arguing about the nature of ethics, governance, and whether soup counts as a beverage. Today's debate, whether laughter has moral weight. Master Lu clears his throat. Laughter, he begins, is chaos. It disrupts hierarchy. If a servant laughs at a noble's mistake, the world flips upside down. Master Qian counters, gently fanning himself. Or perhaps, dear Lu, it flips right side up. If a noble's mistake is funny, let it be known. Otherwise, we're just piling silence on top of stupidity. That earns a low snort from Master Bo, who rarely speaks but once composed an essay titled In Praise of the Unexpected Cough. His position is clear. You sip tea and listen as they circle around the topic like wary cranes. Laughter lacks restraint, Lu insists. Laughter, Qian says, lacks hypocrisy. Historians still argue over whether this trio ever had a real influencer, whether they were simply tolerated because no one dared evict three old men with government pensions. But in hushed corners of the court, copies of their dialogues circulate, sometimes with footnotes, sometimes with doodles. One such note, in the margins of a copy retrieved from a silk merchant's luggage, reads, "If humor is rebellion, may my teapot be a general." You'd like to believe Shinmen wrote that. The debate continues, and you notice something odd. The three philosophers so different, so entrenched there enjoying themselves. Their voices rise, hands wave. At one point, Master Bo accidentally flings a persimmon into the pond and mutters, "Ah, philosophy sinks." The others laugh. Yes, laugh. It's soft, it's wheezy, but it's real. And no one stops them. Because no one's around, or whether everyone nearby pretends not to notice. That's how it goes now. The guards look away. The servants hum. Even the koi fish seem to swim in careful ignorance. You realize that in some parts of the palace, the silence is no longer law, it's a performance. A ritual maintained on the surface, like lacquer on a cracked bowl. Later that day, you overhear two junior scribes playing a game called Hierarchy Shuffle. They assign animals to court roles. The emperor, a crane, dignified, aloof. The head advisor, a tortoise, slow, ancient, possibly asleep. The tax minister, a crow, always around when something dies. It's juvenile and brilliant. When the game reaches which animal laughs in secret, one of them answers, the duck, because its quack echoes like gossip. They both giggle and freeze. But you're the only one who hears, and you're not telling. Back in the philosophy pavilion, Master Lu is attempting to redefine joy as a form of moral alertness. Master Qian draws diagrams in the dust with a twig. Bo falls asleep mid-thought and mumbles something about the virtue of naps. And you sit and think about what it means to control a society's sense of humor. Because it's more than sound. It's about permission. It's about who gets to find something funny and who doesn't. About whose voice can rise, whose breath can tremble with mirth, and whose cannot. A court that bans laughter is a court afraid of reflection. Because laughter, at its core, is a mirror. A moment when the world turns itself sideways and we see clearly, if briefly, how absurd things really are. That's what philosophers know. That's why they debate it. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the emperor fears it most. Because a man who never laughs might never know when he's being laughed at. It's just after dusk when you hear the scratching. Not the sound of rats though. In truth, you've seen a few noble rats lounging smugly near the kitchens, but the delicate, deliberate scratch of ink against parchment. You follow it through a side hall behind the Eastern Archives and into a small lantern-lit study. There, alone, with only a stack of blank scrolls and a half-eaten bowl of cold millet, is Shen Min. He's still writing. His face is a study in serenity, but his fingers move with a kind of defiant rhythm. One hand dips his brush in ink, the other drums quietly on the table. The scroll before him is different from the rest. No coded maxims, no double-layered wordplay. This one is pure. It's a joke book. Not satire, not metaphor, just jokes. You ease closer and glance at the title, The Book of Eight-Legged Laughter, which is already funny because centipedes were recently declared too chaotic in symbolism by the Ministry of Etiquette. Why eight-legged, you whisper. He doesn't stop writing. Because 6 is balanced and 10 is ambitious. But 8, he finally smiles. 8 just looks funny walking. And so it begins. The jokes are short, pithy. Many involve hapless scholars, suspicious vegetables, and an overzealous tax inspector with a mole shaped like a coin. Some are surprisingly clever. A man seeks enlightenment from a mountain hermit. The hermit speaks only in riddles. The man returns 3 years later and says, "I have achieved clarity." The hermit blinks and replies, "Sorry, I was just constipated." Others are, well, why did the imperial rooster cross the road? To avoid being interpreted as metaphorical. Still, here in this palace of rules and hierarchy, the very act of putting pen to scroll for the purpose of laughter is revolutionary. But it's also dangerous. Shen Min knows this. He hides each finished scroll inside hollowed-out copies of the collected writings on humility, irony, preserved in literal volumes, and he makes copies, 2 dozens, perhaps hundreds, by now passing them to trusted hands, couriers disguised as tea merchants, gardeners who tuck them into pots. One copy is supposedly smuggled inside the belly of a roasted duck. That's probably a joke. But with Shen Min, you can't always tell. Historians still debate whether the Book of Eight-Legged Laughter truly survived in full. Some believe fragments of it inspired later Tang Dynasty humorists. Others suggest the entire manuscript was found centuries later in a hollow pillar during a temple renovation, but was mistaken for a weathered tax ledger and used to wrap dumplings. Regardless, the influence is undeniable. You witness it firsthand during a midsummer poetry festival. Officially, it's a solemn affair. Readings on virtue, harmony, and rain patterns. But beneath the surface, things are shifting. The calligrapher's hands accidentally smear one character into another, transforming blessing into flatulence. A nobleman's poem ends with a couplet so oddly suggestive, a ripple of suppressed coughs passes through the audience. And then boldest of Alicourt musician performs a new piece titled Meditation in C minor with sudden goose. Is exactly what it sounds like. One soft, solemn melody interrupted by a perfectly timed honk from a hidden flute. You watch the Emperor's expression carefully. He doesn't move, but his fingers tap. Just once. A mistake? A beat? Or maybe, for the tiniest second, approval? It doesn't matter. Because the next day, a copy of the Book of Eight-Leg Laughter is found in the sleeping mat of the Minister of Rites. Not the original, just a copy. A page or two, enough. Panic ripples through the court like tea spilled on silk. Ministers gather, guards search rooms, servants are questioned, and Shanmin, he vanishes. Not arrested, not tried, just gone. His study is cleared, the jokes disappear. But you know better. You remember his voice, soft as ink drying. If laughter is a mirror, let the Emperor see himself. You find a final scroll beneath your pillow the next evening. No note, just a short riddle. I move in silence, leave no trail. I weigh no more than air, yet empires chase me, fail by fail, to trap me unaware. What am I? You smile, because you know the answer. It's a joke. The palace shifts in mood after Shanmin disappears. Not abruptly, not loudly, just subtly. Like the moment when a tightrope walker wobbles but doesn't fall, a collective breath held slightly longer. A silence that grows deeper, not because people are quieter, but because they're listening for something that's no longer there. You return to the hall of reflection, expecting tranquility. Instead, you find architecture trying its very best to be stern. This is the Frown Palace. It didn't always have that name. It was once called the Hall of Harmonious Governance. But after the Emperor's Laughter Edict, it underwent renovations, quiet ones, like everything here. The new stonework was chosen for its acoustics not to carry sound, but to suppress it. Sloped walls curved just enough to muffle echoes. Carpets of heavy silk line the floors, so even footsteps seem to apologize. Lanterns are placed deliberately low, casting soft shadows on faces, making every smile seem like a trick of the light. The courtiers have adjusted. They walk slower, speak in monotone. Even their hand gestures have flattened, no flourishes, no enthusiasm. It's a kind of performance art, bureaucratic mummery. The Emperor had the throne room itself repainted in dull jade and brown, with murals that depict feels not festivals. Even the dragons on the wall are drawn with tight mouths, serpentine but solemn. You stare at one too long and start to wonder if it's judging your posture. There's a new protocol in place now. Every visitor to the palace must pass through the gate of measured demeanor. It's not a metaphor. It's an actual archway flanked by 2 stone lions and 1 living attendant with a scroll. The scroll has a checklist. Eyes lowered, lips flat, breathing audible, but not joyful. You pass, somehow. But you can't help noticing how many people fail. The carpenter assigned to restore a rotting beam grins too easily when Thangdri assigned to broom storage. A low-ranking steward stumbles and lets out a surprised "ha," sent to oversee scroll binding in the Western Annex, where binding might also apply to one's personality. You pass through the throne room and spot something almost human. An old woman cleaning the baseboards, humming. Not a tune, just a rhythm. You smile without thinking. She doesn't, but she winks. That's enough. Because here in the Frown Palace, rebellion is not red banners or uprisings. It's micro expressions. It's misplaced syllables. It's finding a pun in a food label and choosing to leave it there. Historians later note a strange trend in architectural documents from this period. Dozens of tiny design corrections submitted by unnamed workers. Walls moved half an inch. Panels carved with abstract shapes that, if viewed upside down, might resemble a grinning monkey. One surviving fragment of ceiling panel reads, "Let the beams bear the weight. The people must be light." It's possibly just carpentry advice. Or not. You move through the palace and find a gallery once filled with portraits of imperial ancestors. Most are gone now, replaced by minimalist ink circles meant to represent eternal seriousness. The lone survivor is an ancestor known for winning a war by pretending to be drunk. His expression is disturbingly jolly. They've painted a veil over his mouth, literally. Black ink brushed across the face, but even that feels like it might peel. Because here's the thing about architecture. It always reflects intention. And right now, the Frown Palace's intention is control, order, stillness. And beneath that, fear, not of revolution, but of ridicule. The emperor fears becoming a joke, which is why every column, every scroll, every stone is arranged to remind you, here, laughter is dangerous. And yet, as you leave the hall, you notice a gardener adjusting the rocks in a dry landscape garden. The stones are shaped like facessorine, neutral. But one looks like it's smirking. You lock eyes with the gardener, no words. But the rake in his hand moves rhythmically. 3 swipes, pause, 3 swipes, pause. Like the beat of a joke waiting for its punchline. Like footsteps echoing through a palace built to mute them. Like Shenmin's ink, still wet on scrolls, now hidden in hollow beams. And you realize something. Even in a place designed to suppress joy, laughter doesn't die. It just learns to tiptoe. It begins in whispers. Not scandal. Not rebellion. Just puppets. One evening, you wander past the servants' quarters and see a cluster of people huddled in the courtyard, their faces lit by firefly lanterns. At first you assume it's a prayer, vigil, or perhaps a quiet reading of imperial decrees. But then, a shadow moves. A cloth curtain parts, and a puppet's head bright red, comically oversized, with eyebrows like startled caterpillar spokes into view. You stop. The crowd doesn't notice you. They're too busy holding in their laughter. The puppet speaks in a wheezy falsetto. Today I met a scholar so serious, he wept when his tofu smiled. A ripple runs through the group. Shoulders tremble. Hands cover mouths. The puppet bows. Another one appears, this one dressed as an imperial advisor, with a long scroll dragging behind him. It takes 5 full seconds for him to unroll it across the tiny stage. He begins reading in a droning tone. By order of the emperor, citizens must now ask permission to sneeze, and must apologize to the air afterward. Someone in the audience snorts. A real, unfiltered snort. Panic flashes for a moment, but no guards descend. No one runs. Instead, the puppeteer quickly transitions into a melancholy poem, praising the silence of clouds and the virtue of still socks, just in case anyone's listening. This is the new performance art of the silent court. Satirical puppetry with plausible deniability. Humor cloaked in sorrow, mockery disguised as metaphor. You later learn the puppeteer's name is May. She used to serve tea in the Empress Dowager's residence. No one knows who taught her how to manipulate shadow puppets, but some say she once dated a man who could make paper blush. You're not sure what that means, but you like it. Every few nights, May performs in secret. The audience is always small, always cautious, but always hungry. And she's not the only one. In the Poets' Quarter, verses begin to change. Where once odes to discipline and grain harvest dominated, now you hear subtler tones. The crane stands still, noble and pale, but dreams of a muddy pond and a duck who tells jokes. You find this one scribbled in chalk behind a door frame. It's unsigned and deeply illegal. Art, it seems, has declared independence. Even embroidery gets in on it. One court lady, famous for her needlework, begins stitching flawed patterns. Tiny rabbits in her tapestries wink. One particularly controversial sash features a koi fish tripping over its own tail. It's not much, but it's enough to make people notice, and the court begins to stir. Historians still argue whether this flowering of subversive art was spontaneous or coordinated. Some claim a network of artist painters, poets, puppeteers had long been exchanging messages in coded silk patterns and garden stone placements. Others believe it was simple convergence, that humans, when denied expression, inevitably create their own channels, like water through stone. You're there when the first complaint is filed. A noble manthan, rigid, always wearing robes that smell faintly of pickled radish, submits a formal grievance against a certain puppet show that allegedly implied the emperor's feet were too small for justice. He demands an investigation. What follows is almost farcical. An entire morning is spent by the Ministry of Harmony reviewing puppet designs. They issue a decree. All puppets must reflect proportional dignity. A week later, a puppet appears with feet so large it cannot walk properly. It falls over every time it bows. The audience dissolves into silent, shaking laughter. No one is caught, but everyone remembers. You visit the Empress Dowager's garden the next day. She sits with her ladies under a canopy of flowering wisteria. She's older than you expected, her hair silver, but her eyes sharp. She sips tea and watches two court girls perform a fan dance with overly dramatic flourishes. At one point, a fan accidentally smacks a goose statue, knocking its beak off. Gasps. The girls freeze. But the Empress? She chuckles. Yes, chuckles. Soft, dry, but unmistakable. Her attendants look horrified. She waves them off. Let the goose suffer. He's been smug for years. You don't forget that. Because that moment is a shift. A quiet woman with power, acknowledging the absurdity of it all. And once someone of rank opens the door, even a crack, the wind starts to blow through. The wind of art, of poetry, of rebellion disguised as entertainment. Because even in a palace built to suppress laughter, creativity blooms. Not loudly, but persistently, like bamboo through stone. The wind is stronger now. Not literally, it still glides gently through the palace colonnades, moving tassels on lanterns and rustling robes. But metaphorically, oh, it howls. Because the silence at court, so long cultivated like a bonsai tree of repression, is starting to shiver at its branches. And all because of a eunuch who couldn't stop laughing. His name is Huai, mid-ranking, mild-mannered, known for excellent tea pouring and truly abysmal calligraphy. He's worked in the palace for nearly 20 years without incident, until the day of the tea ceremony. It's a formal occasion, of course, in offering to the ancestral tablets in the Hall of Fragrant Rituals. The emperor is present. The ministers are lined up like ceramic figurines, and the incense smoke coils in measured, dignified spirals. Huai steps forward with the ceremonial teapot. He bows, he pours, and the spout squeaks. Not a normal squeak, not a quiet one. A long, drawn-out hiccuping wheeze that sounds almost like a goose being slowly surprised. The room freezes. Huai freezes. And then it slips. A giggle. Just a breath at first, then a snort, then a full, involuntary chuckle. He tries to stop. Oh, he tries. But it's like holding in a sneeze with a feather stuck in your nose. The more he suppresses it, the more it erupts awkward, breathy, echoing off every sacred wall in the room. He's not mocking. He's not rebelling. He just can't help it. The emperor watches. His face is unreadable. Huai drops to his knees, still giggling. "I'm sorry, your majesty," he chokes. "It's the pot." It wheezes like a minister reading poetry. A few officials gasp. One chokes on his own breath. And from somewhere near the rear of the room, there's the unmistakable sound of a suppressed snicker. Just one. But it lands like a thunderclap. The ceremony is cut short. Huai is escorted out not by guards, but by two palace stewards trying very hard not to smile themselves. And here's the twist. He isn't punished. At least, not in the way you expect. He's transferred to logistics oversight for distant storage facilities. A role so boring, so far removed from courtly politics, it's practically a vacation. Rumor spreads. Some say the emperor spared him because he respected his honesty. Others say he simply didn't want to make a martyr out of a man whose only crime was laughing at a squeaky teapot. But something changes after that. You feel it in the way palace staff begin to greet one another with slightly upturned lips. In the way tea ceremonies now involve a sound check before the emperor arrives. In the way Salmonino One knows who begins leaving scrolls titled The Weekly Wheeze in supply closets. Each one features an anonymous joke, a badly drawn cartoon, and a riddle that somehow references a court official's hairstyle. Historians still debate the origin of the Weekly Wheeze. Some say it was Huai himself, smuggling jokes from the storerooms. Others claim it was a collective cooks, scribes, gardeners writing under one shared pen name, the Phantom Giggler. Whatever the truth, its effect is undeniable. Laughter, once driven underground, is now seeping through the cracks of the marble tiles. Even the guards are different. You notice one night as you pass a patrol they walk in pairs, but now they talk. Not much, just a few words, but one chuckles. You hear it. A low, cautious chuckle, like someone testing the ice on a frozen pond. You don't report it. No one does. Because somewhere between Huai's laugh and the puppet shows, between the riddles and the rice bowls and the Empress Dowager's subtle smile, the court has begun to shift. The laughter is no longer hiding. It's tiptoeing into daylight. Of course, the emperor doesn't acknowledge this. Not directly. But he issues fewer decrees now. Fewer punishments, more reminders of decorum, worded in soft language, like a father gently warning a child not to run near the Pondivan as he watches them dip a toe in. And late one night, as you pass a quiet garden where the plum blossoms fall like snow, you hear a sound. It's faint, brief, but unmistakable. A laugh. Low, male, alone, from behind a screen where the moonlight touches only the edge of an imperial robe. Was it him? You'll never know. But just maybe, the man who tried to ban laughter has finally heard one too many squeaky teapots. You don't expect the Empress Dowager to be the one who finally pushes back. But then again, no one does. She has always been quiet poised, regal, wrapped in layers of silk the color of dusk. She moves like incense smoke, her voice rarely raised above a whisper. For years, she's played her role perfectly, the calm moon orbiting the Emperor's unshakable sun. But beneath that still surface, a ripple has begun. It starts, oddly enough, with a poetry night. Yes, an innocent gathering of court ladies and scholars in the West Pavilion, formally described as an evening of seasonal verse and harmonious reflection. Harmless, right? Except the invitation includes a peculiar phrase. Attendees are encouraged to bring works that explore irony, wind, and the untamed heart. You hear about it from a chamberlain who rolls his eyes so hard it's practically a head injury. She's hosting satire, he mutters, but dressed it up in silk and size. And he's not wrong. You attend the poetry night. It's elegant, serene. Candles float in porcelain bowls. Guests sit on lacquered stools with embroidered cushions. The Empress Dowager sips osmanthus tea with her eyes half closed, a small smile barely hiding at the edge of her mouth. And the poems? Oh, they're sharp. One noblewoman reads a piece titled, "On the Emperor's Favorite Brick." It's about loyalty, supposedly. But every metaphor sounds suspiciously like a man stuck in place, unable to laugh, cry, or think outside his designated square. A senior scholar follows with a verse comparing the imperial court to a still pond full of sleeping frogs. Another guest stand ambassador from the kingdom of Chu offers a foreign riddle. If a tree laughs in the forest, but no courtier hears it, is it treason? The room exhales. No one dares laugh out loud, but the corners of mouths twitch. Sleeves are raised, eyes meet across porcelain fans. And then the Empress Dowager clears her throat. Silence. She begins to read. Her voice is soft, measured. The poem is called The Banquet of Birds. It tells of a great feast in the sky, where all birds are invited but only the quietest may speak. The owl issues decrees, the dove nods, the crane stares sternly across the table. But the sparrow? The sparrow giggles. And so the sparrow is banished, but the feast becomes dull, the food tasteless, the sky dim, until one day a thunderclap startles the owl, who spills his soup and laughs. Just once. And in that moment, the sky lightens. The feast begins again. She finishes, sets the scroll down, and smiles. Not a smirk, not a twitch, a full, calm, serene smile that seems to say, I remember how this palace used to breathe. The room holds its breath. Then, from the shadows near the garden entrance, the sound of a guzheng begins to play. Not the typical mournful melody, but something brighter, teasing. It dances. It's deliberate. This is not a poetry night. This is a test. And the Emperor hears about it. Of course he does. The next morning, palace runners deliver a scroll to the Empress Dowager's chambers. It is not an accusation, not a reprimand, just a clarification from the Ministry of Ritual. Future poetic gatherings must avoid themes likely to provoke mirth, levity, or excessive metaphor. That phrasing makes the rounds faster than any joke in the puppet underground. Excessive metaphor. It becomes a punchline in itself. You see it scrawled in chalk near the kitchens. Beware the tomated is an excessive metaphor. You hear a guard mutter it when someone compliments the moon. You find it embroidered, delicately, on the handkerchief of one of the Empress's ladies. The court, in all its embroidered silence, has spoken. Historians still argue whether the Empress's poem was a direct rebellion or merely a wistful memory. But what matters isn't what she meant, it's what everyone else heard. Permission, possibility, a soft breath after holding it in too long. You visit the West Pavilion again a week later. It's empty. The lanterns have been taken down, the scrolls removed. But on the table, someone has left a fan. Its ribs are painted with bamboo. Its silk surface bears only 3 words. Let the sparrows sing. You hear it before you see them. Laughter, not loud, not unrestrained, but genuine, careful, even, like a hand brushing silk soft, but undeniable. You follow it through the maze of side courtyards toward the outer banquet hall where foreign envoys are being received. Once, these gatherings were vibrant affairs, a mix of languages, clothing, styles, spices, but under Emperor Wen, even these exchanges have become delicate, choreographed. Diplomats know the rules. They bow deeper, speak slower. Their laughter is saved for after they leave the palace gates. But tonight, something's different. The envoys from the northern steppes, Mongol chieftains dressed in heavy wool and cheeky smile shave arrived. And they brought jokes. You arrive just as one of them leans forward across the low banquet table, holding up a carved ivory figurine shaped suspiciously like a goose wearing a crown. The emperor raises an eyebrow. The Mongol translator grins. Our Khan sends this gift. It is called the Minister of Unexpected Decisions. Silence. Then the chieftain adds something else, gesturing to the figurine's comically exaggerated nose. The translator hesitates, then mutters. He says, "This goose is good at pointing in many directions while going nowhere." For a moment, the court stops breathing. Then, from the far end of the table, a court official ancient, almost decorative lets out the tiniest, wheeziest chuckle. All heads turn, but no reprimand comes. The emperor blinks once, then reaches for his wine cup and raises it to the chieftain. "Tell your Khan," he says flatly, "that we appreciate his candor." And the Mongols, they burst out laughing. Genuine, raucous. The sound fills the room like summer thunder. You glance around the court. Some ministers look horrified. Others more interestingly look relieved. Because here's the secret everyone's been tiptoeing around. Foreigners are allowed to laugh. They're expected to. That's how diplomacy works after all. Jokes are currency. Humor is bonding. Even Confucius recognized the importance of tone in communication. One scholar famously noted that laughter greases the wheels of difficult conversation. But the emperor's court? They've been riding a rusted cart for years, pretending the squeaks are intentional. Now it's undeniable. The Mongols spend the evening telling stories, not all funny, but all alive. One involves a warrior who tried to bribe a river god with soup, another, a boy who tricked a ghost into becoming his horse. The laughter that erupts afterward is tinged with awe, confusion, and something almost spiritual. You watch the emperor carefully. He doesn't laugh, but he listens. And when one particularly bizarre story ends with a Mongol impersonating his own goat, the emperor lets out a sound. Not a chuckle, but a sigh that almost curves. And later that night, when the banquet is over, a servant finds something strange on the emperor's table. A folded slip of paper. On it, in calligraphy unmistakably imperial, are 4 words. The goose may lead. What does it mean? Historians still argue. Some say it was a joke, others claim it was a signal to lighten court protocols. A few believe it was simply a reference to the Mongol gift, a way for the emperor to acknowledge, without admitting that joy had entered the room. You think back to that moment. The figurine, the translator's hesitation, the emperor's raised cup. It wasn't just tolerance. It was invitation. And in the weeks that follow, subtle changes take root. The next time foreign envoys visit from India, from Persia, even from Korea, they are greeted with music, actual music, not dirges, not meditative flutes, but something with rhythm. The Mongols return with another goose. This one has a scroll in its beak. The emperor smiles. Not wide, but enough. You see it, and so does everyone else. Because when laughter crosses borders, it doesn't ask for permission. It carries stories. It carries truth. And sometimes it carries a goose with a very pointed nose. You would think the emperor, after all this buildup, might simply cancel the laughter ban, perhaps with a dignified decree wrapped in 17 layers of metaphor. But no, Wen does something far stranger. He disappears. Not in the dramatic vanishing into the mountains way. Number. He simply starts walking the city in disguise. There are whispers about it long before anyone confirms it. A street vendor swears an oddly clean beggar haggled with him over a steamed bun. A child claims an old man with imperial eyebrows bought her a spinning top. A baker tells his cousin that Master Wen, a quiet traveler who smelled faintly of sandalwood and rose oil, requested a joke along with his sesame cake. You follow the trail. At first, you assume it's coincidence. But then you see him on a narrow street just outside the capital's eastern gate, dressed in dull linen, hair tied simply, no guards. He sits on a bench near a dumpling stall, watching. Children play in the dirt. A dog chases a cabbage. A woman yells at her husband for eating the last pickled radish. And someone tells a joke. It's not even a good one. Why did the scholar fall asleep in the cabbage patch? Because he misunderstood what it meant to turn over a new leaf? A few people groan. One laughed so hard they dropped their sugar bun. The emperor, he just watches. Historians still argue whether this actually happened. The official court records for this month are curiously sparse. One document notes the emperor was in retreat, meditating. But others scribbled on the backs of merchant receipts, And hidden in Family Diary Estelle, a different story. A story of a man testing his own empire's pulse. You see him again 2 nights later, this time in a tea house. The performance that evening is part music, part comedy, part chaos. The star is a woman with a voice like wind chimes and a sharp tongue that slices through hypocrisy like hot oil through tofu. She mocks court rituals. She impersonates ministers. She even mimics the emperor delicately, respectfully, but unmistakably by pretending to sign decrees using a goose feather and a frown. The room roars, except for one corner, where a man in plain robes holds his teacup a moment longer, then sips. And just before he sets it down, a smile so faint you might call it, a rumor touches the corners of his mouth. He leaves before the show ends, but not before dropping a single copper coin into the performer's bowl. You hear about it the next day. Everyone does. The performer is summoned to court not for punishment, but for cultural consultation. She returns a week later with a new hairpin and a face that suggests she has no idea what just happened. You don't see the emperor in disguise again. Maybe he's done walking. Or maybe he's just better at it now. Because something changes in the weeks that follow. The court remains quiet but less brittle. The scrolls issued from the palace began to carry warmth. One decree thanks the Ministry of Agriculture for planting not only rice but patience. Another praises the military for standing still with such enthusiasm. And one your favorite reads simply, "A nation is not weakened by its laughter, only by forgetting how." Was it really him? Was he always like this? Or did he need to see the people laugh to understand why he feared it? Because laughter, once foreign and threatening, now seems curious, gentle, a language he never learned, but finally decided to study. You walk the streets that evening, looking for the man with imperial eyebrows. You don't find him, but you do find a bakery offering harmony buns, fluffy, sweet, and shaped like smiling faces. You buy one. It's warm in your hands. The court is quieter than usual. Not in the way it once was, not the brittle, enforced hush of silken paranoia, but in the way a room grows quiet when someone tells a story that no one wants to interrupt. Because something happened. No decree was issued, no law repealed, but one afternoon in the Hall of Imperial Rights, a sneeze slipped loose. A real one. Loud, sudden. The minister bowed, apologizing profusely. But just as he was straightening up, someone at the back, perhaps a young scribe, perhaps a guard, let out a chuckle. The chuckle became a laugh. And then it spread, like candlelight catching along a trail of forgotten oil. Giggles, snorts. Someone clapped their hand over their mouth and still couldn't stop. The court dissolved, not into chaos, into something far more dangerous. Relief. You were there. You watched it break like a wave. And you saw the emperor Rizenot angrily, not slowly, just rise and look out across his ministers, his scholars, his advisors. He said nothing, but he didn't leave. He simply walked to the central dais, turned to face the great bronze doors, and stood in silence, listening, allowing it. No one was punished. No one was exiled. And in that moment, 1,000 sleepless hearts inside the palace understood. The ban was broken, not by decree, but by sound. Later that week, you returned to the puppet courtyard, May is back, this time with new characters, a weeping bureaucrat who dreams of being a goose, a scholar whose books spontaneously explode with jokes, a tiny puppet dog who speaks only in riddles about dumplings. The crowd is larger now, bolder. No one bothers pretending this isn't what it is. Even the guards watch with arms folded and expressions that, for the first time in years, aren't carved from stone. But the real surprise comes when a child climbs on stage's mall. Serious, hair in too perfect knot sand, mimics the emperor's infamous speech cadence. The rice must be dry, the heart must be neutral, the socks must align. The courtyard explodes with laughter, and no one is arrested because something has shifted in the bones of the court. Even the walls seem to echo differently now. You pass a scroll being hung in the Ministry of Records. It's new, official, but at the bottom in very fine calligraphy is an unusual postscript. Reviewed by the Goose of Humor. Approved without giggling, but not without effort. The scribe shrugs when asked about it. He says the emperor requested it. Historians still argue about this moment the day laughter broke the palace. Some say it was the culmination of years of silent rebellion. Others believe it was planned, that the emperor orchestrated it as a final test of his people's will. But you were there. You remember the laughter, the real kind, the kind that comes from years of holding it in. You remember the minister trying to bow and laugh at the same time. You remember the sound of a single chuckle cracking the perfect shell of imperial decorum. And you remember the emperor standing with his back to the court, head tilted as if trying to catch a distant melody. Maybe it was a song, maybe it was his own heartbeat, or maybe just maybe it was the sound of a palace finally remembering how to breathe. Later, you walk the North Corridor, where once even the dogs were trained not to bark. You pass a new pup chubby, clueless, eyes full of mischief. He lets out a sharp little yip. The guards flinch, then smile. You keep walking, thinking about all the things no longer forbidden. The years pass. You're still in the palace, though the palace itself no longer feels like the place you first stepped into. Gone are the days of performative stillness, the hollow corridors echoing with the absence of laughter. In their place, something softer. Not chaos, this is still the Han court, after all but humanity. Carefully measured, lovingly flawed. The emperor is older now. You see it in his shoulder show, they no longer pull quite so tightly toward his ears. His robes are simpler, his hair streaked with silver. His court has grown used to his moods, but also, perhaps, to his learning. Because somewhere between fear and control, he discovered something surprising. He didn't hate laughter. He feared what it might reveal. And once that fear was faced in the streets, in the tea houses, in the courtyard where a child mimicked him with dumpling wisdom, it no longer held power over him. Now, laughter appears without scandal. You hear it in official reports, like the one from the southern provinces that includes a marginal note. Crops good, morale high, goose still suspicious. You see it in court art, where painters return to bold brushwork and exaggerated expressions, yes, even smiles. And you feel it at the annual spring banquet, where the emperor himself, seated beneath a lantern carved like a laughing carp, raises his cup and says, "May our harmony be imperfect, and our joy deeply inconvenient." The crowd erupts, not with formality, but with a sound that used to mean danger. Laughter And this time, it's not suppressed. It rings through the columns, bounces off lacquered wood, floats across dishes of ginger duck and candied lotus root. The eunuchs chuckle, the scholars wheeze. The Empress Dowager herself throws back her head and lets loose a laugh that sounds like it's been waiting decades to arrive. Even the puppets are there. May performs for the banquet now openly with the Emperor's blessing. Her latest piece features a very serious minister who slips on a scroll and is haunted by the ghost of a teapot. It ends with the minister learning to laugh by accident after being sneezed on by a pigeon. The emperor laughs hardest of all. You find yourself near the garden that evening. The plum trees have bloomed early this year, and their fragrance carries over the walls, mixing with the lingering scent of wine and roasted chestnuts. A child runs past you holding a wooden goose. It honks. You don't stop her. You sit beneath the same carved pillar where, years ago, a young scholar named Shen Min once hid a scroll full of forbidden jokes. The pillar's still there. The scroll is gone. But in its place, a small brass plaque. It reads, "Let those who stand here remember the silence, and let their laughter echo twice as loud. No signature, just memory, just transformation." Historians will one day struggle to describe this reign. Some will call Emperor Wen a paradox, both a suppressor and a liberator. Others will focus on his reforms, his economy, his policies of restraint. But those who know better, they'll talk about the laughter, how it began as a trickle, a ripple, a breath behind a hand, and became a tide, a slow, deliberate tide that taught even an emperor that joy, real joy, cannot be ruled. It can only be recognized. And then, if you're wise, shared, the palace fades from view now like ink bleeding softly into water. You walk one last time beneath its red-painted beams, where once laughter was a crime. The stones beneath your feet no longer seem so stiff. Even the shadows hum with warmth. Far off, someone strums a stringed instrument, slow and sweet. You pause at the old courtyard, where plum blossoms fall like paper confetti. The stone bench where the emperor once watched a puppet show still sits in the moonlight, dappled with memory. The air is cool and quiet, but not the kind of quiet you first found here. Not the frightened, breathless hush of tension. Note this silence is peaceful, like the space between the last laugh of the evening and the first breath of sleep. You sit down, you close your eyes, and if you listen closely, you'll still hear that first real chuckle that echoed through the halls and shook the empire from its stupor. Not a revolution, not a war cry, just a laugh. And that was enough. So rest now. Breathe. Let your shoulders drop. The story is over. And the silence is not empty anymore. It's full of the memory of joy. Sweet dreams.